This group aims to analyze the institutional context in which participatory design is carried out. And this is particularly important for two main reasons. One is to review the policies and programs in which we are carrying out participatory design. And the second one is to empower communities in the process of negotiation with policymakers and experts that are coming in to discuss with them the plans that's affecting the community. So the first one, it's by bringing up this information related to policies and to programs that crucial information can be brought to the negotiation table that will inform those decisions that are taken.
Caso seria isso. Saiu a rua.
Botaram em cima de essa folha tá em cima.
Particularly important, we identified in the Paraíso workshop was issues related to the land use regulations. That it was fundamental to know, for example, some regulations related to the space that each house needed to have between themselves. And without that type of information, then the decisions that will be taking place would not conform with the statutory regulations of the city, which is fundamental to be embedded within the existing regulations. But the second reason for analyzing institution, which is actually, I think, the most important one, is that it empowers the local community in the process of negotiation and communication with the different actors, with the experts that come to the community. And when they come with already a pre-established solution, if this knowledge is already within the community, that can be challenged, and that can a much more proactive relationship can be established with community members. And sometimes once this information is in the hand of the community, they can come up with alternatives that maybe a policy and experts, the policymakers and the experts, they didn't necessarily thought before. And if this information is involved, sometimes unexpected solutions comes about. To carry out this institutional analysis, we applied a tool which is called the Web of Institutionalization, which has been developed by Karen Levy. So this web is a very interesting tool because it allows us to look at the practices, the procedures of different organizations, so that we can understand how those different groups and institutions, how they're going about to pursue a certain goal. In this context, we are looking at housing rights. Okay, the point of this workshop was to look at housing rights. So we actually adapted Karen Levy's Web of Institutionalization to understand how those different groups are going about to claim or to facilitate access to housing rights in the city of Salvador. And these different groups can be, of course, formal or informal, which we call formal or informal institutions. The informal ones, we have social movements or grassroots organizations, or some formal ones like the government organization, maybe ministries. In our case, the Secretary of Urban Development, which we analyzed the practices and procedures. And the tool really focus on what people mean by housing rights. At the first place, we define what is the meaning of housing rights, and what they do, how they plan, how far they represent the people that are members of those groups, so that we can review threats and opportunities in the everyday practice. And once we review those threats and opportunities, it becomes much clearer to develop strategies, to understand places that there are synergies of different people's goals or different groups' goals and objectives, and when there is differences. And by revealing these differences and synergies, these strategies can flourish in a much more proactive way, and collaborative strategies become much more feasible. The implementation of this web could be actually divided into 4 different stages and steps, which I'm going to describe here. Step 1 is about adapting the tool. Step 2 is about identifying your major players, your major actors in that scenario. Step 3 is really about the group discussions. And step 4 is about analyzing the discussions that come through the group activities that's been carried out. Step 1, adapting the tool. Before even engaging into the tool itself and looking at the series of interconnected questions, the user really needs to get a real understanding of the issues and the context in which we operate. What are the social, the political, the economic, and the environmental contexts within that context in which participatory design is taking place? So basically, what is really the conditions for housing rights to be implemented? This is the first step that one really needs to engage with, which involves a series of interviews or conversations with key informants that can be academics, that can be activists, can be members of civil society organizations, politicians, to get familiar with the major issues and tensions of that particular context. And that will be fundamental for adapting the tool. Once we have that better understanding of that context, then we can start engaging into the actually adaptation of the series of the interconnected questions. So it's fundamental to adapt the questions and to also not only those questions but also the logic of the questions, the way in which you're going to pose them in your group discussions that will allow that reflection to take place, so that you can reveal the threats and the opportunities. After you do that, then you need to develop your tools. So you need to write each question in one different card, and the card needs to be big enough so that people can see that from a distance, because you want people to see them. And you also need to make the linkages between the cards that would allow you to generate the discussions. And in the case of our activity in Paraíso, we made those linkages out of cardboard because they were quite prominent and visible from a distant position, and that worked very well. Step 2 is to identify the major players. And that's very important because you're going to have to identify who you're going to be discussing with and who are the major players that needs to be interviewed. And that interview can be, as we discussed before, as an individual, but mostly, more importantly, through group discussions. And those major players, of course, they would involve your grassroots organizations, your community-based organizations, to the more local level, such as the residents of the neighborhood, but it can also involve the leaders of the neighborhood, if there is a neighborhood association. Maybe this neighborhood association is under a large umbrella of a series of different neighborhood associations, under maybe an umbrella of a social movement. So maybe also you want to have another meeting with this large umbrella. And maybe of course there will be governmental departments that are going to be also very strong major players. Maybe there are the private sector that will be influencing the process of participatory design. I'm thinking here, for example, water suppliers, electricity suppliers, from the formal and the informal suppliers, waste management companies. Maybe you're going to be influencing. So maybe also funders, housing finance institutions, that in our case we interviewed one, and using the similar logic we came up with very interesting results. So identifying those major players become crucial, and in each context those players are going to be different and they will have different characteristics. Sometimes they will be more formal, and again sometimes more informal, or maybe a mixture of those two.